From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts, conversations with local leaders reflecting on the hard-earned lessons of public leadership. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman.
What I took from my experience in the Marine Corps was leaders have two responsibilities: mission accomplishment and troop welfare. And some days the mission is troop welfare.
That's Wayne Handley, Interim City Manager for Buena, Virginia, and the city's former Chief of Police. In this Shenandoah Valley community of roughly 6,600 residents, Wayne helped lead the police department through a difficult chapter, rebuilding morale, restoring public trust, and strengthening connections with the community. A Marine veteran, licensed counselor, and founder of Blue Oak Wellness, he now brings those same leadership lessons to the broader work of city leadership. Wayne Handley, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Matt, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This is very exciting.
So we're talking here at the end of May, and you were telling me something before we hit the record button here about what a beautiful day it is in the Shenandoah Valley. Tell everyone what a beautiful day it is.
It really is a gorgeous day. And, you know, when you live in such a wonderful place that is just, it is breathtaking to look around and see the rolling hills, just the green grass, the trees. This is just such a beautiful part of the country. And I'm so appreciative to live here. I'm originally from Norfolk, Virginia, which is in the same state, but might as well be on a different planet compared to our beautiful Shenandoah Valley out here.
Not the humidity.
No, not the humidity. It's a beautiful sunny day. We've had some rain here recently, which we really needed. And the flowers, wildflowers are blooming and birds are everywhere and deer are all over the property. So it's just a beautiful day.
You're making me jealous here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We've already hit 100 degrees and we're at the very start of what will always be a long, dry summer.
Oh, Matt, I'm getting sweaty and feeling like I'm going to melt just listening to 100-degree temperatures already. That's so much.
Wayne, I want to start off with a really nice, big, easy softball question for you. So looking at your bio, you served in the Marines. You've worked as a paramedic and an ER tech. You spent decades in law enforcement. You earned a PhD and became a licensed mental health counselor. You opened a practice. You served for most recently nearly 3 years as Buena Vista's police chief. You're now serving as the interim city manager. Quite a journey.
Yes.
My softball question for you: how do you define leadership? I mean, what are the most important qualities that you think about for leaders?
You know, if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have had different answers for each one of those. And I think they would have overlapped. But I think as I've matured in my own leadership journey and made mistakes and learned just how important humility is as a trait, when we talk about traits, I think a standard definition of leadership is hard to really appreciate. When I think of how I explain leadership, it is the ability to motivate. It is the ability to serve. You actually, it sounds like a softball question, but it really is not, because leadership is such a complex idea.
So to motivate people, to serve, to do that with humility, there's a lot already packed into that.
There is. And, so I want to fall back to an example when I took over the police department. And by the way, Matt, and this is a very, very common, I don't want to say mistake because it's not really a mistake. In the entire universe, when you look at the letters that spell Buena Vista, they are pronounced Buena, except in Buena Vista, Virginia, they pronounce it like Buick.
Oh.
Yeah. That's how they know when people aren't from here.
Buena Vista.
Like, oh, we're in Buena Vista. And he's like, yeah, you must not be from here. It's actually, they pronounce it Buena Vista. Believe me, I was corrected very quickly and never made that mistake again. That being said, so I take over the police department in Buena Vista, and it's a time where there's a lot of friction within the organization. There's fractures, there's cliques, there's lack of trust with the community because of some situations that happened before I arrived. And the first thing we did was I reached out to the person who was acting as the interim chief, who, by the way, applied for the job as well. And so we had a conversation on the very first day, like a hard conversation about he applied, he did not, he was not the person that was chosen. I'm not from there. However, and this is where the humility comes in, I take leadership very seriously because I believe it is a responsibility of a person who steps into a leadership position to develop that next generation of leaders. I would like to say it's a transformational leadership theory practice when it comes to behaviors, but it's even more amalgamous than that. It's not necessarily situational leadership or servant leadership or contingency leadership. It is really dependent on the situation. And in that moment, the behavior that I was modeling was the behavior that I expected from every single person in that department, from the youngest officer to the most senior leadership person, including myself, where we use and we practice integrity, we practice service, we practice courage, we practice respect. And those became the value statements that were the basis for the transformation of that organization. Integrity in all things, respect at all times, courage in all action, and service before self. We used those as our moral compass, so to speak, our leadership compass. And those decisions, the decisions we made for that department, for the benefit of the community, as long as they were made with one of those values in mind, I could have officers that would make mistakes and they would come in and they had the understanding that they could make a mistake. They could come into our department and say, I screwed this up. Hey, were you acting with your values in mind? Yes, I was. Don't worry about it then. Okay. We can work through this. And so there was that trust that they could grow professionally, they could grow personally, they could develop their skill set as police officers. So when we say, how do you define leadership? There's just so much that goes into it. It's such a complex thing that I can't think of just one line that encapsulates everything that leadership needs to be.
Let's talk about this a little bit, because I ask this question of a lot of people and think about this a great deal. The recipe includes all the things that you said, and I'm sure some other things, to motivate, to serve, to have integrity and respect and courage. Well, I believe all those things. But I wonder if there was another word that you used that actually is the gist of everything. You talked about the responsibility to think about succession, right? To think about who's coming next. But I think It's the word responsibility, that leadership is the owning of the sense of responsibility that something has to happen, and then working all the levers to make sure that it happens. So it doesn't necessarily mean being at the front of the parade, but it does mean making sure that everyone is connected to the work that needs to be done. What do you think about responsibility as being the core of leadership?
I believe it has to be part of the core of leadership. If you ask any of my officers, if you ask any of my current team members, the people I'm responsible for in my leadership position, if you said, hey, can you give me anything that Wayne will, and an anecdote that Wayne will say during the day as part of keeping the progress going? Hope is not a strategy. Someone has to make a decision. Leadership is not about you. It is about the people you're responsible for. Those things they literally plastered around my office.
These are things that are on the Wayne Handley bingo card. People can
100%.
check these off during the course of the day.
100%. To include modeling behavior. That is one of the things that I work for. I work towards the most. When I look at, and it was on the wall in my office, like literally painted on the wall, are you modeling the behavior you expect from our officers? And anytime a supervisor would come in with a leadership challenge and say, I'm having a problem with this officer, I'm having a problem motivating this person, or I'm having a problem with this situation, I would just point.
Are you modeling the behavior that you expect of others?
Are you modeling the behavior you expect? Because if you're not, you can't come in here. We have to have a different conversation.
Is that the center square?
That is the center square. Modeling behavior, and that's part of responsibility. So when we tie this back to responsibility, I have the responsibility to model the behavior that sets the tone, that then leads into culture, that then transforms people that may be coming into the organization into the kinds of people that we are proud to say they're part of our team. And they make good decisions and they act in the best interest of the people around them. And all of that together comes from that sense of responsibility. Someone has to make a decision. Someone has to be in charge.
Wayne, you are, as we all are, the cumulative effect of all the experiences and the education we've had. If I could kind of go backwards in your career to when you were a Marine, or when you were working as a paramedic, or when you were going for your PhD in counseling, are there certain leadership qualities that you would have pointed to that would have been maybe a different center square in those environments? Like as a Marine, how did you think of leadership differently than you think of it today?
So first off, I joined the Marines at 19. Prefrontal cortex not even fully formed at that point. So it was a different perspective because this is late 1989 into 1990 when I joined and went to boot camp. As I looked at leadership there, and the Marines did a phenomenal job of setting a good foundation. They really did. Because what I took from my experience in the Marine Corps was leaders have two responsibilities: mission accomplishment and troop welfare. And some days the mission is troop welfare. You have to put that first. And it was very black and white. And it was reinforced by the structure of the organization, rank structure. You have enlisted, you have officers. Officers make decisions, enlisted people make decisions. Officers have more responsibility. Enlisted, as you gain rank, you have more responsibility. So leadership was a ladder. It was, as I look at it now, leadership is a series of systems that interact. I make a decision over here, it has a ripple effect. And I understand that. I did not understand that when I was a 20-year-old jarhead, moving from PFC to Lance Corporal to Sergeant. I understood we've got a job to do. It's very black and white. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make sure it gets done. And I didn't understand that leadership meant development of your people and yourself. I heard, a great comment from Stanley McChrystal. I'm a big fan of his work. He has this phrase where he says, you can let your people fail, but not be failures. It's a great opportunity for them to learn and develop and make good decisions and kind of test out their wings. When I was this young Marine in a leadership position as a young platoon sergeant, that was never an option. I never would have done that. I didn't have the maturity at that time to do that. Again, we still had Vietnam era Marines when I was in, right? We still had people that had served. And so leadership was looked at very linear.
What an interesting evolution, though, to go from leadership is mission-oriented, if you will, task-oriented, right? It's take that hill, get that thing done. And that kind of seems obvious. That what had to be learned on the job, if you will, is that understanding, as you said, that the mission is team welfare and that you have to take care of people in order to be ready to pursue the mission and to have the capacity to take care of that. That's something that I think translates even now, it must, into your role as a city manager or as a former police chief. This idea that there's something bigger going on than what the strategic plan told us is the objective that we have to do. Am I making that evolution correct?
That's exactly the way it is. And I think you used a word there that really does resonate, and that's strategic thinking, right? Not just thinking about the mission, not just thinking about people, but thinking strategically. That's part of consistent development. I know that I still have so much to learn, even as much as I have learned over my almost 40 years in public service. I have so much more that I can learn. And that's why I look at other leaders and I listen to their stories and I hear what they did and what mistakes they made and how they learned to be more strategic and intentional in their leadership decisions. And I think that is part of that evolution, my own evolution, and how I've grown, is that I do think more that way than I used to, especially when I was, as you said, when I was a young Marine in a platoon, just getting tasks completed.
So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's talk about when you joined the Buena Vista Police Department. Did I pronounce it right this time?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
I
it.
had to actually write a little note to myself here on the side to remind myself it's like Buick. Buena Vista. So I understand it was a difficult chapter for the organization. Morale was low. Public trust had been damaged. There had been a lot, there needed to be a bunch of rebuilding. I think a lot of local leaders find themselves in situations that they inherit like that, where they're still responsible for moving people forward. I'm not trying to rehash the details of the situation, but I am curious, when you first arrived, what did you sense the department and perhaps the community needed from you as a leader? How did you start prioritizing the work to be done?
So, as the focal leader for that department, the way that I approached this was being as transparent as possible and being approachable. And I'll give you an example of how we started with that. The city manager at the time was Jason Tyree. He's a great boss to work for, and he hired me. Before I was sworn in, I suggested to him that we do the swearing in publicly and that we invite the community, because I am a person coming from the outside of the community in, and I'm taking on a significant leadership responsibility, a very public-facing leadership responsibility, one that works very closely with the city manager. I suggested that we start on day one, literally minute one, be available, be transparent, be approachable at my swearing in. It's public, it's open to everybody. We had a nice turnout. It was that's how I started. And I made it a regular part of my duties that if someone knocked on the door at the police department and said, I want to talk to the chief of police, if I wasn't already in a meeting, that's what happened. Whether it was to complain, whether it was to just ask a question, whether it was to vent about something, I made myself available. Additionally, so this is the Southeast United States, right? We're in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There is a restaurant chain called Hardee's out here. And Hardee's is a local community type place, franchise and corporate mixed stores. Breakfast is a big deal. They open at 6 a.m. and there are a lot of retirees that will go to Hardee's at 6 a.m. and they'll gather and they'll socialize over a cup of coffee and a biscuit. So every Wednesday at 7 a.m., when I got to work, I'd walk from the police department over to Hardee's, and I would sit down, and you could ask the chief of police any question you wanted about anything that we had going on, as long as it wasn't a confidential personnel matter or an investigation that we had, you would get a straight answer. If the media called, I always answered. And there would be times where I had good conversations with them up front to say, sometimes the answer is, I cannot tell you that right now. But for the most part, we built very good relationships. And so, as a chief of police, you really don't want your name in the newspaper anywhere. Mm-hmm. However, with the media partners that we had, we built good relationships so that a lot of our press was positive. It showed the police department in a light not related to enforcement action. It showed the police department engaging with the community. It encouraged the community to talk to our officers and tell us what they thought about what we were doing. And sometimes you get an earful. However, what we found was that that's what people needed. They needed to be able to interact with the police department and feel like they could trust officers. And by being approachable and getting to know the officers, we started to slowly work our way into the trust of the community.
Wayne, I want to ask you about something here, because I am not by nature a cynical person, but I will admit that as you were starting out the story and you were talking about approachability, which I'm going to add to the list of, leadership qualities, right? That I had this first kind of whiff that what you were saying was, well, it's the chief's visibility, it's the chief's approachability or transparency. It was only on reflection that it occurs to me that you're modeling
That's
behaviors
it.
that you're expecting others to follow as well.
Yes. And we had opportunities where I would bring officers with me to some of these events for no other reason than to just introduce them around.
Why was it so important for your officers to see you modeling approachability? What were you hoping it would help them do?
So in my mind, and it's an unfortunate part of law enforcement culture, that there are departments, not all departments, but some that look at communities as a us and them situation. And sometimes it's not even every person on a department. It can be the culture of an organization, or it can just be a few people within an organization. Buena Vista is a small department. The department I came from was much, much larger. The modeling of behavior and what I expected from the officers was to see this is what police work is. Police work is problem solving. Police work is interaction. Yes, there are times where you drive fast or you get into fisticuffs with somebody who's absolutely resistant to complying or going, wherever they need to go. But most of police work, the overwhelming majority of police work, the time you spend is interacting with people who are having a really tough time. Like nobody calls the cops when things are going well. They only call the police when they need help or they have a situation they don't think they can control. And so this is an opportunity for us. And there's another part of this as well that I'll get to in just a moment. This is an opportunity to show the officers, young officers who may not have had this opportunity to see this behavior before, that this works a lot better. This makes our job so much easier when we develop really these positive relationships that are not enforcement related. When we develop this trust between the community and the organization itself, then when things do get difficult, when times do turn, when something does happen that the community has a real problem with, we have built enough social capital during these non-enforcement related actions that we're able to work through them. And I don't mean that the community gives you a pass. I mean that at least the community has an understanding that these things do happen in law enforcement. And so, and it's modeled from the chief all the way down to the new officers. Every single person does it. The other part of that is this: you cannot be a focal leader and expect your people to do anything different than what they see you doing. It's almost like a parent and child relationship, where a child will look at a parent and they will model, they will repeat the behaviors that they're used to. When we talk about this in mental health, when we talk about cycles in family dynamics, those are learned behaviors. So that's what I chose to do.
Wayne, I could have imagined, though, that you could have answered the question about the challenges that you faced and the initial priorities. And again, I don't know the specifics of it, and they may not matter in this example, but you could have easily said, well, the budget was tight, morale is low, we're having trouble with recruiting, we're facing a retirement of a large number of people we're going to have to replace. There was some crisis that happened in the community that caused a lack of confidence. Any number of things could have gone on. What I'm hearing you say, and again, I want to make sure I'm getting this right, is that you're saying you prioritized, in your words, the building of social capital, because in your way of thinking about this, the way we take care of our community best, the way we advance our mission the best, is by involving the whole community in understanding who we are, what we're about, the kind of people we are, that the leadership starts at that social capital level. Am I overstating it, or am I getting it?
No, that is essentially, and this is leadership by Wayne, right? This is Wayne's leadership theory.
That's what we're here for. This is the whole class.
And not everyone may subscribe to this, but that works. That process works. It is not fast. It is not easy. It takes time. And there had to be a lot of conversations that were one-sided, where I was hearing about every bad experience that a person had ever had with the Buena Vista Police Department in the history of their family. and what other chiefs had done and what other people had done. And I'm not saying that they were all negative, but that was the route that I chose. And I knew that by modeling that influenced the culture of the department, so that was the norm. That's what was expected. And I used to use those words. I was very intentional with my words. I would say to my officers, we don't do that here. We do this, whatever that was. And so they knew they could predict what my responses would be to their questions or their requests because there was consistency in them. And they all tied back to our values statements and modeling the behavior that we expected.
Sometimes a conversation goes somewhere deeper than expected, and rather than rush through it or cut away too much, it's just better to give it the space it deserves. That's what happened here. So we're going to pause this conversation with Wayne Handley and return next week with part 2. And honestly, I'm glad we are, because in the next episode, Wayne shares a deeply moving story from early in his law enforcement career. A moment involving discipline, mentorship, and grace that profoundly shaped the way he now leads others. It's one of the most human and memorable reflections on leadership I've heard in quite some time, and I thought you'd want to hear it.
It's a story that I share because this was a perfect example of failing, but not allowing me to be a failure.
If you'd be interested in sharing some of the hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, I invite you to apply to be a guest. You'll find the guest link in the show notes. And as always, if this conversation sparked a thought or a reflection for you, I'd love to hear from you. Call me at 602-688-2724 and leave me a message. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo and produced by Cinnamon Denise Murray. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation with Wayne Handley.